Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Kasun Hansamal. I'm a first year undergraduate from University of Colombo School of Computing. In this first video series, I'm going to explain how to create our very own web server and host it on the internet. In this video, we are going to create a virtual private server to host our website, and then we are going to access that same server using SSH. So before we start, we need to choose a good cloud computing service provider to rent our VPS. There are many great cloud computing service providers on the internet like DigitalOcean, Linode, Vultr, and Oracle. But for this tutorial session, I'm going to use Amazon AWS as my cloud computing provider. You are free to use any other service. To create a new VPS on Amazon, first we need to go to the Services menu and then select EC2. In here, we need to go to the Instances section and click on the Launch Instances button. After that, we will be greeted with this web page. The first thing is we need to name our server. I'm going to name it as my web server. Then we need to choose an operating system for this VPS. There are many operating systems to choose. For this tutorial session, I'm going to use Debian as my operating system. Here the instance type refers to how much memory and CPU we are going to allocate for the VPS. For this simple web server, I'm going to allocate 1 GB of memory and 1 CPU core. It is also free tier eligible. The next thing is we need to create a key pair to log into the VPS. To create a new key pair, we can click this button. Here we can give a name to our key. I'm going to name it as my web server. We can use PEM to use with OpenSSH and PPK to use with PuTTY. PuTTY is available for Windows and OpenSSH is available for both Windows and Linux. To create the key pair, we have to click this button. After that, it will ask to save our .pem key. I'm going to save it in my documents folder. Here, now we need to select our network setting. First, we need to allow SSH traffic since we are connected to this server using SSH. And also then we are going to host our web server. To make it accessible to anyone on the internet, we need to allow HTTPS and HTTP traffic to our server. After that, we can just click launch instance to our new instance. It may take some time depending on the configuration you choose. After that, to see our instance, we can click the View All Instances button. To connect using SSH, first we need to get our public IP address. To get the public IP address, we can click the instance ID. And then we can see our IP address. I'm going to copy it to the clipboard. Using this public IP address, we can now open a new terminal window. Type the command SSH followed by our default username. In AWS, it is admin followed by a @ symbol, and then we need to paste our public IP address. To successfully log in, we also need to provide our private key file. Since I saved it on my documents folder, we can provide it by using the -i flag followed by the path to the private key file. Here I provided my web server private key file using /i flag. After running the command, we will be first asked to verify our fingerprint. We can type yes to save the fingerprint. Now, as we can see, we got an error. This is because our private key file doesn't have correct permissions. So before we are going to connect, we need to set the correct permissions to our private key file. To do that, we can use the chmod command. The correct permission is to be read only by the same user. We can simply add chmod 400 plus the path to the private key file. Now we can retry to log into the server. This time we are successfully logged into the server. Since now we are connected to our server, we can start configuring the system. The first thing we have to do is making our SSH connection more secure. We can do that by editing our SSH configuration file. We can use any text editor. I'm going to use the Nano text editor. We also need super user privileges to edit the configuration file. This file is located in etc directory. Inside the SSH, the file is known as sshd_config. Now we can start modifying this file. The first thing we are going to change is our SSH port. By default, it is running on port 22. We are going to change that to a random port number. This is because anyone can guess the default SSH port and try to log into our server. Then we are going to disable permit root login option. We can uncomment the line, then add permit root login to no. We also need to enable public key authentication. And we also need to disable password authentication. Since we are going to connect using a key pair, we don't need to enable password authentication. After editing this configuration file, we can now save the changes using Ctrl+O shortcut. It will ask us to where to save the file. We are going to keep the default config location. And now we can exit the text editor using Ctrl+X. Now we successfully edited our SSH configuration file. The next thing is we need to install a good firewall. There are many firewalls to choose from, but for this tutorial session, I'm going to use UFW, the uncomplicated firewall. First, we can check if it is already installed by running sudo ufw status command. Here, as we can see, the uncomplicated firewall is not already installed. It is not by default installed on Debian systems. We need to install it using apt package manager. But before installing a package, we need to make sure our system is up to date. We can update our system using sudo apt update command. And then this should be followed by sudo apt upgrade command. This will make sure all of our existing packages are up to date. This might take some time on new systems. Now we can see the update process is completed. We can now install UFW program. The command to do that is sudo apt install UFW. After installing the firewall, we can start adding our firewall rules. The first rule we need to add is for our SSH connection. Since we use the port 9143, you can recheck it by going back to the previous command. Here, as we can see, we changed our default SSH port to 9143. To add a rule to allow SSH connection, we can use this command sudo ufw allow followed by the port number /tcp. Now SSH rule is updated. Then, since we are using this as a web server, we also need to enable port 80 and port 443 for HTTP and HTTPS support. We can rerun the previous command and change the port to 80, and then again run the same command and add port number 443. Now we need to enable the firewall on system startup. We can do that by running the command sudo ufw enable. It will ask for confirmation. We can just enter Y. Okay, now the firewall is activated on system startup. We can check our rules using sudo ufw status command. As we can see, we added 3 rules for both IP version 4 and IP version 6. Even though we added the security rules into our operating system, we also need to make sure that these rules are also applied from the Amazon control panel. To do that, we can go back to Amazon control panel, then go to security section. In here, we can see our created security group. After clicking that, we can see we already added 443, 22 and 80 port. But since we changed the port 22, we need to edit our current inbound rules. After clicking the edit inbound rules button, we need to delete the existing SSH port. We can just delete using the button, and then we are going to add a new rule. Here we are going to define it as custom TCP, and we are going to enter our SSH port. For the range, we are going to use the default range. And now we can save these rules. After adding these rules, we need to check whether our SSH connection is still working. To do that, we can go back to the instances menu and click on our instance ID. Then we can select reboot instances. It will ask for confirmation. After it is rebooted, we can retry to connect into our server. The command is same as before, but this time we need to specify our SSH port since we changed it from default port. We can add the -p flag followed by our port number. Then we can use same credentials we used before. And we also need to add our public IP address. Then we can provide our private key file. Now as we can see, we are successfully reconnected into our VPS. In the next video, we can install Nginx and start building our web server.